Culzean Castle is located on the west coast of Scotland, about an hour's drive from Glasgow. The oldest section of the castle was built in the 16th century. However, what you see today is from the 17 and 1800s. Culzean has a fascinating history due to its age and location, but one of the most intriguing parts of its story is the castle's history of smuggling.
So my name is Martin Monti. I am the Visitor Services Supervisor for Culzean Castle. I take care of everything that happens within the four walls here. So I want to make sure that visitors come in through the front door, have a good time, and leave happier than they were when they got here. Smuggling in Scotland generally probably would have been going on earlier, but really came into being after the Union of the Crown. So the early 18th century, there were two different tax systems in the UK. The Scottish had their own tax system, England had their own, and when those two systems kind of meshed, at the very beginning it was not easy for the Scottish people. So they would used to paying duties on certain items, and suddenly those duties went up very high. So from after 1707, smuggling really started in earnest here.
Culzean's geography massively contributed to the smuggling trade that happened during the 18th century.
Culzean was a perfect location for it. It was a nice shallow bay where the boats could land on the beach. They could get the goods out of the boats, and there was already an existing storage area that was kind of hidden, but perfect for illicit goods.
The goods that were smuggled into Culzean tended to be things that were unavailable in the area, or things that could bring great profit.
So first of all, there would be whiskey from Arran, not too far away, but that was still an illicit good that they would get from there. Rum from the Caribbean, so that would come all the way from the Caribbean and then land on the shores here. Wine from Europe was very popular. Tea from China, very high duties on tea, so that was a very popular item to smuggle. And also things that you might not expect, luxury items like soap, cloth, especially if it was fine cloth like silk, and even some foodstuffs. So at certain times there would have been higher taxes on oats, some other foodstuffs, and they would bring those in and smuggle them in. The goods would land on the Isle of Man on large ships, and then they would be transferred to Culzean on smaller ships. That was only about a day or two journey from here. It could be a very long journey if it was tea coming from China, but for the last part of the journey, that was very short. The ships that they were smuggling here immediately, they would be a smaller ship, something that could land on the beach, something that would go rather undetected through the water, so it wouldn't be too large to make a big impression on people as it went past, but not large enough to carry the goods.
Culzean Castle was owned by the Kennedy clan from the 16th century to 1945, when it was handed over to the National Trust for Scotland. Due to the Kennedys owning the castle, it is often discussed how involved the family were in the smuggling at Culzean.
For the most part, we would say that the Kennedys were not involved. Turned a blind eye to it though. So people like the main factor for the estate here, who would have been well known to the Kennedys, was involved in the smuggling, but as far as we know, that's as far as it went.
Depending on where the smuggling activity was happening, smugglers could have been tough and violent people like some famous English smugglers. However, that was different in Culzean.
Locally, they would mostly be normal people. So in other parts of the UK, there were very infamous smugglers who were villains and did terrible things and had great reputations. But locally, that wasn't the case. So most of the smugglers here, they had other jobs. They were farmers, they were merchants, factors for the estate here at Culzean. They were doing something else, and the smuggling was just another way, an investment, a way to make some more money.
But after the 1750s, the smuggling trade at Culzean started to decline.
The smuggling trade at Culzean declined for a couple of different reasons. Most importantly, the trade routes were disturbed. The illicit goods used to come without any tax on them to the Isle of Man, but that became a crown dependency in the mid 1700s, so that route was kind of shut off. You couldn't just go to the Isle of Man, get some cheaper goods, and then bring them back to Culzean. They still had a route with the Channel Islands, but they were a bit far to be bringing things on a small boat to Culzean, so they didn't do that. Also, enforcement got a little bit better. So instead of having a local person who was hired as the excise man, they actually had soldiers who would come in to enforce the tax regime.
There were many punishments for smugglers, with some infamous criminals from South England being hung for their crimes.
The first and probably the most immediate punishment would be confiscation. So you paid money for a boat full of goods to come here, and that would get confiscated. So you would lose that immediately. So that's the worst. But that's not the worst thing that could happen, because on top of that, you could also be fined. So you would have the loss of your goods and a fine on top of it. If you couldn't pay the fine, you could go to prison. So you could be imprisoned for it. In some cases, and very rarely here locally, but in some cases in Scotland even, ringleaders or gang leaders who were in charge of smuggling gangs were executed. So execution was a possibility. You could be impressed into service with the Royal Navy, so they could make you serve on a Navy ship all around the world, or you could be transported in the early 18th century. That would have been to the colonies in North America.